The Dallas Cowboys officially report to training camp this week, which means football is back. What is the biggest storyline going into Oxnard? All that more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your
Locked
daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. A championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. The same with your vehicle. So for the parts that fit, head to eBay Motors and look for the green check. Stay in the game with eBay Guaranteed Fit, ebaymotors.com. And let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter or X or whatever they're deciding to call it now. McCool BCB. Landon, what's going on, sir?
You can check me out on Twitter. I don't think I'll be on X. We'll see. We'll see how it turns out. I'm doing good. Look, we are there. We've arrived. We are here.
We've arrived.
We have arrived on the week of training camp. So I'm excited to get into this and just to start talking about this stuff.
Yeah. So we're gonna do a little bit of a training camp primer. The Cowboys, I think their first practice is on Wednesday, but that's always just like a really light walkthrough. They have another practice on Thursday. I would imagine things are gonna start picking up, but actually, really quickly, I think last year they did basically like no teamwork the first week of practice. Is that right?
Yeah, I've basically, I plan on maybe going down there maybe this weekend, but honestly, I don't actually anticipate them really getting started until early next week. That's usually that first week is really just getting everyone in, getting everyone checked in, everyone learning kind of what practice is going to be like, the kind of the pods that they'll go to, what happens when the whistle blows and that sort of thing. But the real like hitting and, kind of actual interesting stuff probably doesn't actually start until, Sunday or Monday.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about the biggest storylines to watch for over the next month or so. But before we do that, just kind of like a quick primer of training camp. Actually, it's our philosophy here is that it's not about one play or one practice. It's about a string of practices. Can you be consistent from practice to practice? We steal this line every year from our friend Sigmund Bloom. It's a drumbeat, right? We want to see somebody have really positive notes coming out of practice every day before we get excited. Anything else to add there?
No, I think that you summed it up.
Yeah, okay. I got a story to tell you about training camp. This is one of my favorite stories I've ever read. It's from Jeff Risdon. He was talking about how not everything you see at training camp matters and context matters a lot. Yes. He was at the Cleveland Browns training camp practice in 2018, Baker's rookie year, and he got to practice early. And before the drill got started, Todd Haley was the offensive coordinator, and he was telling Baker, hey, we're going to practice this drill where you're in the pocket, you're going to scramble out to the right and throw the ball away, and I'm going to show you how to protect your body on a throwaway, right? Like just the drill. So they start working on the drill, and a couple big name reporters come in a little bit later, and they see Baker just throwing the ball out of bounds. So what's the headline in the story? The next day is Baker Mayfield wildly inaccurate in practice. That's my kind of story for everybody. Like, be careful how much stock you're putting into all these practice reports, because a lot of times people don't even really know what they're seeing.
Context, man. I mean, listen, you ran right straight into my brand, baby. Context matters. Like what they're doing, why they're doing what they're doing on the field matters. And that shows you right there. Like he's protecting the drill there is to show you how to protect his body. It's not about where the ball ends up. Who cares where the ball ends up? The drill is about throwing the football away. So I think, this sort of story has happened to me as well, where I was, near the sideline, heard the coaches talking to the players about what the drill that they were doing actually was. And then you go on to Twitter later and there's a complete misunderstanding of what was happening on the field. And I 1000% believe that I have been guilty of the same thing. And you just have to be aware of that. You have to be aware that sometimes you need a little bit more context to understand exactly what's happening. If it doesn't make sense, if the drill doesn't make sense to you when you're looking at it, then there probably is more to it than you understand just by simply watching them, execute it.
And it's another reason why I don't care about like training camp numbers. Like, hey, Dak
No.
Prescott was 7 of 8 for a drill, or he had 4 interceptions in team period. This is a chance for especially really good players to experiment and test their limits to see, okay,
Yeah.
hey, I can get away with this, or hey, I can't try this in a certain situation. And that's the other thing. Like a lot of times these coaches are putting players in situations where
Yeah.
they have to go outside their comfort zone a little bit. They might tell Dak, hey, we're going to practice 3rd and 14 throws here. You've got to drive the ball to the sticks. It's okay if you throw an interception. It's not the big deal, but we know how that ends up being on social media, right? So that's just our kind of just blanket statement is be careful to not overreact to what you see in one drill or in one practice.
It's hard. It's like telling people that have been crawling through the desert not to fall for a mirage that there's water at the end of
Yeah.
their sight. I mean, it's because we all get excited. Football's been gone. Every single little bit is going to want to be examined and cross-examined. And listen, I totally understand. There's a reason I'm dragging my butt out to Oxnard every year to see this. But I do think it's important to understand that sometimes we don't have the full context, and that tracking these numbers like it's a game is not the way to do this. They don't treat every single snap like it's in a vacuum. There's often a lot of specific drilling that's happening in each one of these kind of little pods that they do.
So having said that, what are some things that you can take away from camp? Because you've been there countless years now. Like when you go, what are some of the things in general that you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first, kind of things that you start to look at is, how the players themselves individually look, right? I mean, that's kind of the first place where your eyes go is you just haven't physically seen these guys in a long time, right? So you want to make sure that you're getting an eye on exactly kind of, some of the physical growth that's happened, and a lot of those kind of elements just on the player side, right? And then I think specifically for what the Cowboys are doing this year, we've got a lot to look at when it comes to the run game.
Mhm.
I think specifically, like, there's been so much turnover. I mean, I think, look, purely from an X's and O's standpoint, the offense is going to look different than last season. And I think that's just because of, we've changed play callers. The offense, we don't know how much it's changed, but that's part of kind of feeding into this. But there's been so many faces, and specifically in the run game. Like, I think you look at what's happened. They've lost. They've changed their starting running back. They have different backup running backs. They have a new run game coordinator. They have a new in Blasco. They have a new offensive line coach in Solari. So the run game specifically is going to start looking very different. And I think you could start to kind of see, how maybe some of the plays that they're kind of lining up and especially early on, they'll start kind of stepping through plays, and it'll be a lot of teaching and landmarking of like, okay, you're the running back, you mean make sure you hit the outside hip on this run. If you're the offensive lineman, you're down blocking on the center and make sure you get your outside hand here. So it's a lot of kind of just trying to parse through what they're teaching early on. And especially since there's so much change that's going on, I think that there is some things that we can get just based on, the way that they're running some of these plays that may be different than what we've seen in previous years, and that sort of thing. I think really early on, it's you're not trying to determine depth charts. You're not trying to determine, breakout candidates.
Yeah.
You're trying to see where players physically are, if they look physically different, and you're trying to see, parse exactly what the Cowboys are trying to teach these players, and if it's different than what they've done in previous seasons.
And someone like yourself who's been to these, practices every year, like one thing you'll probably notice right away is, oh, Michael Gallup looks so much springier than he did
Yeah.
last year. Like those are the takeaways to me that like really matters. Okay, this guy looks a lot leaner than we saw him last year. This guy looks a little bit quicker than we saw him. Those kind of things really matter. And I think it does translate over the season. I want to talk more about Mike McCarthy's offense and how it's going to look when we get to camp next. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes in life, we're faced with tough choices, and the path forward isn't always clear. Whether you're dealing with decisions about your career, a relationship, or anything else, Therapy helps you stay connected to what you really want while you navigate your life so you can move forward with confidence and excitement. Trusting yourself to make decisions that align with your values is like anything. The more you practice, the easier it gets. It's just like Cowboys going out to training camp, right? The more that they practice something, the better they're going to get. If you're thinking of giving therapy a try, go ahead and check out BetterHelp. It's absolutely fantastic. It's done entirely online. It's designed to be convenient and flexible so it can be suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And you can switch therapists at any time for any reason at no additional charge. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked-on. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. On tomorrow's show, we're going to be answering your Twitter questions before the Cowboys have their first practice. So make sure you send them into us at Marcus_Mosier, at McCoolBCB. We will be answering them tomorrow. So check out that. Later, let's talk about Mike McCarthy's offense. How quickly into practice do you think you're going to be able to tell the difference kind of between him running the show and Kellen Moore calling this offense?
I think it may take a little while because, we've talked about the idea that we think that the playbook for the most part will kind of stay the same. I mean, I think that there will be, I think they said something like 30% turnover or less than that. So I think, early on it will, they tend to like to do specific things on days. Like today they'll work on red zone stuff, or today they'll work on 20s and out stuff, right? Or
2-minute warning stuff.
Yeah,
right?
2-minute warning, right? They have like different like themes kind of what they're working on during the day. So I think none of that will really change. I think, what will change, as we said, is the play caller and how they call the plays and how they, feel the game and make adjustments as they go. I don't know that we're going to start seeing those changes until a little bit later in training camp, once we start seeing actual 2-minute situations with ones versus ones on offense and defense. That's when we may see a little bit of I don't know if Kellen would have run that play here. And I think that it's, the subtlety and the difference between play callers may be something that is not easily parsed in training camp practices. But I think in the idea of, the changes that Mike McCarthy made to the offense, to the coaching staff, to the players that are in it, those are the kind of things we'll see first, right? Like, for instance, we've heard a lot about how they're changing how running backs are involved in pass protection. We've heard a little bit about how they're changing the way that they run outside zone and inside zone. So I think those changes that McCarthy is a part of will be the ones that we likely will see sooner rather than later, right? Just because we'll see, it does seem like Pollard's staying in to block a little bit more or a little bit less, depending on how it is. Or, it does seem like they're using a fullback a lot more in outside zone than they have previously, which you can only hope. Those are the kind of things I think we notice first before we notice like play calling tendency changes, which will be the kind of main thrust of the difference, I think, in the play calling between Kellen Moore.
Yeah, I was just going to mention personnel groupings. Like that's one of the things I want to find out really quickly, and it's going to be hard because you mentioned like situationally.
Yes,
if they're doing goal line stuff, you're going to see 3 tight ends on the field.
Yep.
It is what it is. When you're in 2 minutes, they're probably going to be in 11 personnel or maybe 10 personnel, right? And listen, I know it's going to happen. They're going to be in 10 personnel, and somebody's going to tweet, "Hey, the Cowboys love their 10 personnel." Yep. We can see them use it a lot more this year. But like neutral situations, I want to see CeeDee Lamb playing in a slot. Is Brandon Cooks lined up, as the Z receiver? Like just things like that over the course of a couple of weeks, I think will give us a better idea as to what the McCarthy offense might look like.
Yeah, and just be on the lookout for things formationally or personnel wise that look unique or different, right? Like, I mean, that doesn't mean that necessarily will, make its way into the regular season or will become a big part of the offense, but it's just something to make note of and see, it's like Connor McGovern playing tight end or fullback. Like we saw some of that stuff early in preseason. We're like, what is that actually a thing, or was this just like a necessity thing?
And
So
the other thing I want to see is is Kevontae Turpin more involved in offense? Like,
yeah,
are they using him more? Are they using less pre-snap motion? I know when Mike McCarthy was in Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers, they didn't use a lot of pre-snap motion. Was that because of McCarthy? Or was that more because Aaron Rodgers doesn't like that? So, just those little things. And I'm not going to tell you whether it's better or worse than it was last year, but those are going to be the subtle changes that we could probably pick up in camp.
Yeah, and again, I think you nailed it on the head. I don't think we should automatically assume all changes are good and that all that or change is bad. I think what we are doing is marking the changes, and then when we kind of see the results of what comes out of that, that's when we can kind of parse
Yeah.
maybe that was a good change or a bad change, right?
The only other thing I want to mention on the offense before we get to the offensive line is I just want to see kind of how the depth chart shakes out. And I know that's a very fluid thing. People
Yeah.
can move up and down the depth chart a lot, but is Malik Davis clearly the RB2? Are they rotating? Is it Ronald Jones? Is Deuce Vaughn, only working with a third team? That kind of stuff will give us an indication of kind of maybe how the Cowboys view these players. And even with the receivers, when they're in 10 personnel, is it Simi Fehoko? Is it Jalen Tolbert? Is Tolbert working with the first team? Again, those would be little signs to show, okay, hey, maybe the Cowboys really do like Jalen Tolbert, or hey, maybe he's still way behind the top 3 players.
Yeah, and again, I think the other thing too you have to remember is that they will also give opportunities to some of these guys. So don't necessarily think that Tolbert getting a bunch of snaps with the first team means that he's suddenly wide receiver 3 or something like that. But I mean, it doesn't mean that those reps aren't important. They are. You need to make sure that when you see guys like Tolbert get in with the first team, or Fehoko is in there as the third receiver as opposed to Gallup, that you see how they're doing, because I mean, obviously, the more that they perform in training camp, the more opportunity they get, and the more chance they actually get to have snaps in a meaningful way in a game in those positions.
One of the biggest takeaways that I'm sure we'll get very early in training camp is how are the Cowboys, rotating with their offensive linemen, who's starting, who's playing where. Let's discuss that a little bit more next. All right, Lena, the Dallas Cowboys have their first official practice on Wednesday. We imagine by the weekend, they'll probably start to ramp up the pace a little bit in practice. How do you anticipate the Cowboys opening up with their starting offensive line for practice number 1?
Yeah, I mean, the real question is, we think the question starts with what's Terrence Steele's status, right? And then honestly, the next stop on that train is Zach Martin practicing? So I think those two things are kind of the first stop, right, on this kind of adventure of exactly how the offensive lines get shake out. If Terrence Steele avoids PUP, if Zach Martin,
which we should find out in the next day or so, I would imagine.
Yeah, I would think so. If Zach Martin avoids the holdout, I would imagine that's your starting right side. I don't imagine that we're going to see a ton of Terrence Steele, even if he does avoid PUP, just because they'll probably play it safe.
As they should.
So I think what we'll likely see is quite a bit of Tyron Smith at right tackle. Whoever is playing right guard, whether it's Martin or Farniak, he's filling in for him.
Matt Waletzko.
Obviously, or Waletzko.
I still don't understand that at all, but please go ahead.
Well, we'll see, right? Maybe it's genius. Maybe it's as silly as we think it is. Obviously, Biotic. And then I think, in that situation, you likely are going to see Tyler Smith as the left tackle, and then a host of folks to try to figure out exactly what's going on in the left guard situation, right? You're going to see Chuma Doga. You're going to see Awesome Williams. You're going to see TJ Bass. You're going to see all those guys get opportunities to kind of mix in there and get some guard work and see what they get. Look, I mean, the other thing is we're going to talk about it. The Zach Martin situation, without a doubt, complicates things as far as trying to sort out the offensive line. I don't know if it's a long-term problem or if it's going to be bad, but it would be nice considering all the things that I mentioned earlier, the change in run game quarter, the change in offensive line coach, the change in starting running back. It would be nice to be able to have the starting offensive line out there for a good portion of training camp to kind of get in sync with everything that's changing here.
He needs a little bit of continuity. Like that would be nice. Like they had none last year, right?
It would be nice to have just some continuity, frankly. Yeah. And I think that's especially now, right? Like, I mean, I think last year Zach Martin missing training camp would have been less impactful as it is this season, simply because of all the changes that I just mentioned. Yeah. So the Cowboys have a lot to sort out, not just the continuity, getting into the swing of things, getting into sync with this new running game. They got to figure out what's happening in that backup left guard situation. And then largely, even though we all feel confident about it, they've got to figure out what's the starting five is. And I think some of these injuries, some of these holdouts, they may complicate some things. But I think one of the benefits you'll get is that you're going to get a lot of these young guards and Chuda Edoga as well. He's not quite young, but you're going to get a lot of these guys lots of opportunities to get snaps with the ones. And so you're going to get a good taste and a good feel for if any of these guys are worthy of changing the initial starting five lineup with the Smiths on one side, Terrence and Zach on the other. And if not, you'll at least have an idea of what the backup situation is in case something happens to Tyron or Tyler on the left side, who's going in at that left guard position.
One thing I've learned about this coaching staff, it's clear to me, like they're comfortable being uncomfortable with the offensive line. Like they're fine just throwing stuff out just to see if it works. And I think it helps build your depth a little bit that you're constantly rotating these guys, but it does hurt your continuity, right? Like these guys just don't work together very often or as much as some other teams. So there's a trade-off, right? And we saw it last year when they had injuries, they were able to kind of keep the ship going, right? The ship afloat with their offensive line, but can it reach, the top offensive line in the league? Yeah. I don't know. But I think because of the injury to Terrence Steele, because of Tyron Smith's, health questions, because of Zach Martin's holdout, you're probably going to get some wonky offensive line combinations, at least early in camp. At least that's my thought.
Yeah. And again, outside of the idea that you'd like to have the starting team out there for continuity's sake, you'd like for them to get a head start on this new system. It's not the worst thing in the world that you're getting these young, kind of unproven interior guards snaps with their team just to kind of sort out a little bit better who you've got as your backups there if you need them. So
because you're going to need them. Like that's the thing.
Yeah, you're definitely going to need them.
You're going to need them now that it's a 17-game schedule, and you're going to probably, if you want to win the Super Bowl, you're going to have to play 4 playoff games. Like you're going to need all of these guys. There's just no way around it.
With the same urgency that we would have discussed at backup swing tackle situation last year, that's the same level of urgency we need to talk about with the backup left guard, because now he is the swing tackle because you have Tyler Smith.
Cowboys football is back, Landon. We made it. We finally made it through the summer. We get to talk about actual stuff on the field this week. It's going to be so much fun. Make sure that you are subscribed to the Locked On Cowboys podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Check out Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. Landon's going to be actually out at Cowboys camp a couple times over the next few weeks, right?
Yeah, I'm going out for all of next week. And then a couple of days maybe following after that. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be out there. If you're out in Oxnard and you see me, come please say hi.
So make sure you're giving him a follow. We're going to have all the latest updates and recaps from practice. But tomorrow, again, we're going to be answering your Twitter questions. So be sure to send them in, and we'll see you guys right back here then.